Are you in agreement with what Twitter and Facebook are doing? Or do you think that journalistic organizations, whether
I think
you
we've
think
got to
right
go
or
back
wrong,
to the fact
should publish this stuff?
Yeah, look, the original sin here for for Facebook, for Twitter, for all the social platforms is that they didn't want to have any rules around speech, which is why it's because they don't want to be considered a publisher and be liable for that content. The unfortunate situation is that then led to this sort of cesspool of conspiracy theories and misinformation and malinformation. Now they are belatedly attempting to put in these rules, but the rules are all over the place. And I think that the big issue here is there's no consistency. This was an incredibly ham-handed way to handle that New York Post piece, because by doing so, what they ended up doing was calling much, much more attention to that story than it otherwise would have gotten. So you've got a situation where
But this goes very much to the issue of who do you want to let be the arbiter of the news and of the quote-unquote truth. Ben, what do you think?
Who do I want to let be the arbiter of the news? You of course. But I think, as Joanne said, they're just totally reactive. The people on the Twitter executives essentially sit on Twitter, watch journalists and activists yell at them, and decide they ought to do something in real time. You just sort of watch it play out, and you almost feel this impulse from the Twitter team that's like, "Gosh, we own Twitter. We get it, and all this stuff is playing out on Twitter. We have to act." And as Joanne said, it totally backfired. I mean, I do think in what Facebook did, you see the beginning of what looks sort of like a system. They didn't ham-handedly ban it. They have a system under which they essentially cause things to reduce their spread, reduce their virality while their independent fact checkers kind of check out whether something is factual. And I don't know, there's a lot of problems with the notion that you have these, largely kind of underpaid junior journalists at these fact-checking organizations as the ultimate arbiters. That is its own huge problem. But I think the notion that the real problem is the speed with which things can go viral, and that there are cases where just damp that down a bit, I think does make sense. Well, because often the context isn't yet available.
Right. Joanne, how would you set it up? And the reason I ask is you have a situation where historically news organizations that were considered credible, and by the way, the New York Post was considered as part of that because they have an editorial operation and they have editors and the like. Obviously, you could argue that they make mistakes. Maybe they make them on purpose. By the way, all news organizations, including my own, have made mistakes over time. The question, therefore, then becomes, though, should those stories be distributed and who should, again, be the arbiter of it?
Yeah, this was a very unusual situation because the New York Post, as you say, it's a mainstream news organization. And look, I love the Post. It's a tabloid. They kind of stretch things and play with things, but they actually don't usually do what they did yesterday, which this particular piece really was sort of beyond the pale for the New York Post because of unverified and for all sorts of reasons, which we don't need to go into. But the fact is that we have never seen mainstream media publications being fact-checked and shut down by or reduced in terms of sharing by a Facebook or Twitter. But we also had never seen them having to do that for a president of the United States. This is the issue here is we have to get to a point, I do think, where the platforms do bear legal responsibility, some legal responsibility for the content that they are that they're promulgating there. I mean, they have tried for years and years to say we're not a publisher. We're essentially just like the telephone wires. We have no control and no responsibility for what appears on our platforms. Now they are belatedly trying to figure out how to do that. But a big part of the issue is simply that they don't have consistent rules. They do have some rules. They're constantly changing the rules. Facebook only recently said, okay, we will ban Holocaust denial posts, which is something they were allowing for some reason. So they change the rules, but then they don't consistently enforce them. And that's the first step that we've got to see going on there.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.